Welcome to Mathew's Month. I'm Mathew Hulbert, former journalist and councillor and current charity trustee, school governor and policymaker. This month I want to talk about what is perhaps the most important subject, and that is the education of our children. We live in a country, even now still in 2016, where all too often your background defines your future, where social mobility is halted, where if you're born poor, you're still likely to end up dying poor. In my view, education should be the great equaliser of opportunity, the great enabler of social mobility. That, in my view, is the comprehensive dream. Great teachers, given the resources and support they need to inspire young minds to gain a love of learning, not just the need to pass exams and to be rote taught, as important of course as passing exams is, and to ensure that young people can fulfil their potential wherever they live in the country and whatever their backgrounds and family circumstances. Instead, what we're getting from the current government is the zealous pursuit of a narrow, ideology-driven agenda which is destroying that comprehensive ideal. Some will welcome that, but I have very serious concerns, and I want to just set a few of them out in this month's video. The first is the fractured nature of education today. Free schools, faith schools, academies, all doing different things. And I know many people say that it is the freedom that this agenda gives to schools that is the positive. And to a certain extent, I can see that schools not being absolutely constrained by only being able to do what the national curriculum says would certainly seem on the face of it to be an attractive prospect. But also what it means is that, you know, to a certain extent at least, depending on which of those types of schools you go to, depends on whether you're getting a high quality education or not, and whether you're being taught certain things which, you know, wouldn't necessarily in the kind of ideal situation be the case. So I think the fractured nature of our schools today is going to be increasingly a problem, and that will also lead to a lack of democratic accountability, which I'll come to in a moment. Secondly, the budget has demanded that all local education authority maintained schools must become academies by 2020, and this is what Chancellor George Osborne announced in his budget last week as we're recording this, and this has caused a shockwave through the education system, because whereas we at the moment we have a situation where yes, there's some schools that are academies, but there are still many that are LEA maintained. We now have a situation where choice has been removed from those LEA maintained schools, and they have been told that by this set date you must all become academies. Now, maybe I missed something with the Tories in intervening years, but it was my belief that they believed in choice, that the big Tory ideal was that in everything we should have choice. But with the Tories today, it seems that we can only have choice as long as it's the choice that they want us to have. If we want to be, and I'm a school governor, and not necessarily speaking about my school in particular, but there are school governors across the land who might feel that they want their school to remain LEA maintained and keep having that support from the local council. They now can't have that choice if this is allowed to go through. I mean, I think we've seen one change in this budget already, and you know, teachers and parents and pupils may force another change on George Osborne and Nicky Morgan, so you know, we can but hope about that. But at the moment we have a situation where all schools must become academies whether they like it or not by 2020. And then we do get to that lack of local democratic accountability. LEAs aren't always perfect. Of course they've made mistakes. Any group of human beings running something do, because we're all human and to err is human. But at least under LEAs there was someone at County Hall, wherever you are in the country, or at your local City Hall, whoever's running your local education, there was a local councillor, a cabinet member, responsible ultimately for the education of all of the children in that area. And that person can be democratically held accountable in council chambers and in their own electorate at the ballot box. And now we have a situation where, to my mind at least, and I've looked into this, that local democratic accountability seems to be gone. I know we're going to have these regional commissioners and that they're going to have boards, and that on those boards you may or may not have councillors, but I think for most people they won't necessarily realise or understand, and indeed why should they, that if they want to appeal a decision, then that middle tier, which used to be the council, is now some quango called the regional commissioner and their board of representatives. And so I think we have a situation where people will feel a step removed from those who are running education in their area, and I think that is a really great problem. And following on from that, a kind of layer down from that middle tier, is the effect of academies, especially multi-academy trusts, on local school governors. As I mention each month, I'm a school governor. I'm very proud to be at a primary school. And we're hearing now from multi-academy trusts that the role of the local governing body, school governing body, is being arguably reduced, because actually the main decisions, the main strategic decisions, are being taken at board level of these multi-academy trusts, and so the local school governors are reduced to, well, not having much of a role at all really. And in actual fact, we heard reported recently in the national press that one of the multi-academy trusts had totally abolished its local school governors, and so that gives me great concerns as well. And then we heard this week in the press that it's been mooted that the government may want to abolish the role of the parent governor. So again, we'll see how true that is, but all of these types of reports instill uncertainty in the education system. Fourthly, cuts to FE and adult learning. We have a situation where, the government says it wants excellent schools, and quite right, but then you have a situation where, again, choice is being eroded, because if you're not going to university, and not everyone wants to, or indeed necessarily should, because we need people with a range of skills, not just necessarily academic. But cuts to FE and adult learning are happening across the country as well, and that's going to be devastating for many of our young people. And finally, my final concern is in regards to the wider holistic education, character building, personal development, and the fact that not all learning could or should take place in the classroom. There's that wider education, and those who know me will know that I'm a big champion for out-of-school youth services across the country, and they are also facing devastating cuts. And so young people who didn't cause the economic crash in 2008, who are not the ones who've got into a situation where we've got a massive deficit which the government says we have to sort out, and yet they're the ones suffering. And I think the reason is because sadly young people don't vote in large numbers. Obviously they can't until they're 18 at the moment. I believe that should be reduced to 16. But even when they're 18, they're busy off, leading busy lives doing other things. And so the government thinks it shouldn't think this, but I think sadly it does, that we can enforce cuts on young people because that's not going to affect our seats at the ballot box. And that is why, and again, I know it's hugely cynical, but I'm afraid sometimes politics is, that is why you don't see cuts very often to those at the other end of the age spectrum, pensioners and senior citizens, and it is because they vote in massive numbers and can lose MPs and others, councillors, their seats. And so, I think I've said it on Mathew's month before, but I really do encourage young people when they reach an age to be able to do so, to use their democratic rights and to get up there and vote, because I think it is only when they do so in big enough numbers that governments will really start to take their needs seriously. And so, I of course continue to campaign against cuts to youth services here in Leicestershire and across the country as well. So that's my thoughts on education. If you agree or disagree, I'm sure many of you watching will have differing views, then do leave them politely please in the comments section below this video. A couple of quick questions from viewers. As you know, we always do this each month. Elizabeth Granger left a comment on YouTube. Thanks Elizabeth, below last month's video. And she asked, I'd like to ask Mathew if he realises that the BDS movement is targeted specifically at Israel and no other states. I must admit I wasn't wholly clear about this last month. I was supporting the idea of being able to divest generally. I think, to be honest with you, I don't want to get into whether I think that should be the case necessarily for Israel. I think the regime there clearly does things which not everyone likes, and indeed here in Leicester City they decided to divest from companies who support Israel. I think I might not get into that, but I support the general belief that local democratic bodies like Leicester City Council, like universities, student unions, like other public bodies, should be able to have the right to make that decision to divest generally, not just necessarily against one specific state, but generally in terms of companies that they feel are doing something which is not ethical, so whether it's the arms trade or fur farming or whatever. So you're quite right to ask that question, Elizabeth, and I will always try and, do always pull me up on these things if you think I've not been clear enough. And finally, Karen in Scotland asks, what is the best way to prevent terrorism? Gosh, Karen, that's quite a question. Well, I guess my attempt at an answer to that would be to foster better community relations, to ensure that we do have strong communities where everyone feels they have a voice, where everyone feels they can put their point of view, whether it is the establishment point of view or not, where everyone feels they have a stake in their community, and goes back to what we were saying earlier on in terms of education, where everyone feels that there is that social mobility and that they can make something of their lives, whatever their background or present circumstance. And I think that is the way, or at least one of the ways, that we begin to ensure that young minds and other minds too are not radicalised into believing that the West and the Western way of life is something which needs to be attacked. So I think strong communities, good social mobility, good comprehensive education, as we've just been saying, and the ability to be part of a society in our democratic process is at least one way of being able to defeat terrorism. So Karen, thanks for that. And I just wanted to mention at the very end of this video the fact that I recently went to Lib Dem conference in York. It was a great weekend in beautiful York, and the Lib Dems are in good spirits. We're a little bit battered and bruised, of course, after last year's election, but we have been winning council seats. We have had 20,000 plus new members since the general election, and we're increasingly in good spirits and ready for the Lib Dem fight back, as it's been coined. And Tim Farron spoke in his leader speech about the need to reconnect as Lib Dems with community politics, to not being obsessed with Westminster and Whitehall, but getting out there and campaigning on people's priorities, and to get into local town halls up and down the country to affect change and to bring about Lib Dem policy solutions. So that was a really fantastic time. And also finally, just to mention that recently it was Fair Trade Fortnight, and I mentioned that in the previous two videos. Loads of local events in Hinckley and Bosworth celebrating fair trade, and also I went down to Parliament for the launch of the APPG, the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Fair Trade. It's brand new, it's a cross-party group, including one of its members is Lib Dem MP Greg Mulholland, the MP for Leeds North West, and I met him down there at that. And it was a really great occasion. There was young people there having a fair trade breakfast as well, because the theme for Fair Trade Fortnights this year was sit down for breakfast, stand up for farmers, and it was just a really great occasion. And I'll just say once again, I'm not ashamed at all to repeat it, because it's an important message. You might get a little bit bored of it in these videos. I'll try not to mention it next month, there's a promise for you. But if you buy fair trade, if you buy a product with a little fair trade label on it, then more of the money you pay, a fair amount, goes to the developing world farmer and grower, who deserves to live with dignity and to be paid a fair wage, and to be able to send their kids to school and have those strong communities that I've just been talking about. So thanks very much for watching once again. Do leave your comments and your questions below, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.